Racism at its core is a belief in the biological superiority of one group over another, first and foremost.
The family, full family, in our prayers, in our thoughts, and they know they have our love.
Bad law have bad results, and this is a bad law.
You have to get involved. You have to know who the county prosecutors are. You can't keep voting these people in, and you can't vote by, by not going to vote. You're giving them your vote.
The national outcry surrounding the killing of an unarmed teenager, Trayvon Martin, an African-American youth in the state of Florida, and the acquittal of his murderer, George Zimmerman, in the state of Florida as well, has prompted people of good conscience from around the world to respond in multiple ways. Florida Africana Studies Consortium is organized precisely to address these issues and was able, within its resources, to develop a project that looked at these issues from our point of view. We were pleased to be hosted by Multitudes Art Gallery in Miami, an African diaspora site as well, for the production of knowledge, visual culture, and its exhibition, Caribbeana, which surrounds us. Welcome to The Verdict, Race, Racialization, and the Criminalization of African American and Latino Youth.
I will now turn over to the panelists. The first of them is Donna Owen.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Babacar. And thank you all for coming. I think we needed a safe space like this to discuss and to have a better understanding, perhaps, of what happened in this case and where we go from here. And as you can see, we have an esteemed panel that will certainly be able to help us in terms of structuring what next or ideas. As Carol says, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I practiced law for a long, long time, 20 odd years. First as a prosecutor and now as a defense attorney. And I do some legal analysis for True TV, HLN, and also for Nancy Grace. Now, what I think we need is a working document which is an understanding of stand your ground and an understanding of self-defense. Let's look first at self-defense. Self-defense comes to us from the common law. We were a British colony many, many years ago, a long, long time ago. And so a lot of the laws that we inherit comes from England, called the common law. And essentially what self-defense says that, or what any defense says, if you are charged with a crime and you, the defendant, you have a right to bring forth a defense which essentially said, yes, I did it, but this is why. And self-defense is one of those. Yes, I did it, for example, but I was intoxicated, is a defense to some crimes. In this particular case, yes, I did it, but I did it in self-defense. And self-defense and common law also extends to defense of others. So it allows you to use force up to deadly force if you think that deadly force or serious bodily harm is going to happen to you. So that is the old self-defense. We've always had it. The context, though, was that you had that defense primarily in your home, in your castle, the castle doctrine. We said your home is your castle, and therefore, if somebody comes in my home, I have a right to defend myself, up to killing that person. In 2005, the Florida legislature, with the wisdom they had, extended that defense, castle doctrine, to include the stand your ground, which says that not only in your home, but anywhere you are, including public space, if you think that deadly force is going to be used on you, you can defend yourself by killing someone. When this case happened at first, as you know, Trayvon Martin case happened at first, George Zimmerman suggested that it was stand your ground. And I remember remember being on HLN and saying that, well, if he's going to claim stand your ground, that's good because he's going to have to testify in his defense. And a lot of people who didn't come from Florida didn't understand that concept because remember, you have a right to remain silent. If you're going to raise the issue of stand your ground and there's nobody else around, the likelihood is that you're going to have to take a stand. So they abandoned that concept because had he gone to stand your ground, they would have to have a hearing and the judge would make that decision. That did not happen, so the trial comes around and now they're going after their defense is self-defense. And if you think about it as a tennis match, remember the prosecutor is the person who has to put on the case. And the defendant has a right to remain silent even when it's a trial. So he doesn't have to say anything. He doesn't have to bring forth any defense, except if he is going to claim some sort of defense, intoxication, or I had an alibi, it wasn't me, I was somewhere else, he has to raise it, he has to bring it forth. So that is essentially what we see here. The prosecutor, the tennis player, the ball went over the net, it went over to the defendant's side. Now that it was for the defense to return, serve by saying, I did it, but I have a defense, and it is called self-defense. The burden becomes that of the prosecutor to put the ball back over the net and say, it wasn't self-defense, and these are the reasons. So as we go forward in discussing it, I just wanted us simplistically to have a framework in which to work, and then we can come back and talk about it in more detail, because it's very difficult if we have different understanding of what is going on.
So I'm going to go to Brad Brown and let him talk a little bit about the NAACP and the positions and race in this particular case.
To me, this is very personal. This tragedy is so great. And the one other thing I would like everybody to do is to keep the full family in our prayers and our thoughts, and let they know they have our love. And I'm very happy that we have Ronald Fulton, Trayvon's uncle, here with us tonight. August 28, 1955. Anybody know what happened? August 28? Gee, yes, Emmett Till. Emmett Till. Now, look at the white press. It took a little longer for me to realize it than I would have been if I'd been reading Jet and
Hold the mic up a bit further.
okay, there, okay. Reading Jet and the Chicago Defender. But nevertheless, the word still got through. And the impact of that picture of Emmett Till with his beaten body has never been out of mind. It moved very far. Going back here, but it's still there. And actually, it was an amazing thing because just like here, there was a trial. Nobody thought there would be a trial. And there's a lot of details about that, but I'll leave that to your African American history studies professors to go into. But nevertheless, it really was a spurious trial. Jury didn't take it seriously. The case was dismissed. The uncle who was a witness was scurried out of Mississippi for his life. The body was taken to Chicago, and Mrs. Till, who I later had the opportunity and the pleasure of meeting, held an open casket. Emmett Till was probably a very significant force in moving the civil rights movement that took place in the next, let's say, 15 years. And it didn't start immediately. It was built with a groundswell. And so when I think about Trayvon, I think back to Emmett Till. And the greatest thing that we can do, do with Trayvon is this movement that's starting now and it translates into the kind of movement addressing the problems of this century, the way that I believe Emmett Till's tragic murder did as a prelude to the boost in the 1960s. I think it can, and I think it can, and I think we need to think about the enormity of what happened in this case. I'm a parent, many of you are parents, and as a parent, what do we want to do? We want to protect our children. When they're young, we grab their hand so they don't run out in the street, we slap it so they don't put it on the stove, and then we try to give them some lessons in life so that when they go out into the world, they are able to protect themselves. We've been involved in the NAACP with training our young people, including my own son, our own son. My wife Maybell's out there, so I better recognize her. And how to respond to police, how to act so that you don't become a threat to them, and you end up not coming home. And I can cite cases where people we trained have come back and said, you know, you probably saved my life. And if you haven't been white, and I've raised white sons too, and I've got a white son that I've had to go to jail when he was arrested when he shouldn't have been arrested. Sometimes I think that was because of my civil rights activism, but that's another story. But I never feared for his life. You never had that same sinking stomach that you do with a black child out in this world. Now, ask yourself as a parent, what would you have told Trayvon to do differently that could have saved his life? Absolutely nothing. So you feel helpless as a parent. And the worst feeling of a parent is to have a child and feel helpless. That there's something you want to protect, to do, and you can't do. It's not able to do. So I think if we understand that and we build on that and we move on and we make other people understand that, we really can rekindle the movement to address the issues that we need to address. And just briefly, the NAACP obviously was against Stand Your Ground before, we're against it now. We think we were important in stopping some of the expansion of Stand Your Ground laws, which sort of halted basically in 2013 when they were going like gangbusters up through 2012 and state after state. But now we've got to try to turn them back. We've got to deal with the racial profiling issue. There's a host of issues we got to deal with. But if there's one that overrides almost all of them, it's the voting rights. It's voting rights. And that's because how do you get Stand Your Ground changed? You get involved in the political system. How do you get better judges? You get involved in the political system. How do you get laws that enable us to address racial profiling? You use the political system. And right now, with the Supreme Court decision, they are working furiously to enact across this country legislation that will reduce people's opportunity to vote. And it is absolutely essential that we get a new Section 4 of the Voting Rights Bill, and with the right kind of pressure. And you have to remember, nobody thought we'd get the 65 bill when we started marching for it. That we'll get a better Section 4. Personally, we would go from, I would like to see us go from five, I believe it is, covered counties in Florida to the whole state when we look at the purges and things that are going on in Florida. So I would ask you to put an August 24 on your calendar and to try to make it to Washington, D.C. Because this march is not just a commemoration of 1963, but 1963 was a milestone. I was there, and it was not only the bringing of 250,000 people, but it was what those people this is now a march with a purpose, not a commemorative march, but a march that focuses on the combination of the issues that have been raised by the killing of Trayvon and the voting rights that stand behind everything. There will be a pre-march here in Miami, so if for some reason you can't go to Washington, at least march in Miami. So I apologize for taking so long, but I thank you for your indulgence.
He was recruited from FIU by FIU and went there as a distinguished professor of international law and also was the associate dean of the law school. He is also the kind of person who has been a consultant to the government of Liberia and a number of other governments around the world as they developed processes that move them from horrible wartime situations to democratic systems. So we have in our midst somebody who is a committed intellectual lawyer and professor who also, without a doubt, I called him and he said I would come. And Chris said I have to change my schedule around because I was in Miami last week. He drove down today from Orlando. Please give him a round of applause.
All right, how y'all doing tonight? Are you angry? I guess we don't have any angry people here. We have a bunch of passages. That's great. Are you angry? Yes! Yeah, you should be angry. I'm angry. The question is, why are you angry? Are you angry because a non-black killed a young black teenager and got away with it? Is that why you're angry? Yeah. Part of it, maybe. No justice. What about when a black kills a black? Are you equally as angry? Or is there some hypocrisy in your thinking? Just a bit. Yeah. Sure. The police mishandled it. We can point at a lot of factors. Let me tell you, I lived in Miami. I attended the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, the same church that the Martins go to. So this is very personal for me. And as someone who travels around the world talking about the rule of law and democracy, it's very difficult to sit in Florida, being from Los Angeles, where we have a different approach to these issues in Los Angeles. But why is it that we're angry? I want to offer you a critique because, yeah, you're angry because there's no justice, but there's another attack that's taking place that your energy may not be in touch with. You see, when a black boy is killed by anybody, but by particularly law enforcement or those seeking to act as if they're law enforcement, an elder told me that that's an attack on the womb. It's an attack on the womb. Why do we have this visceral reaction here when there's injustice across the United States in the criminal justice system? How many mothers do we have here? Raise your hand if you're a mother. Mm-hmm. And if you're a father, raise your hand. And I want to talk about the black boy, not to the disadvantage of the black girl, because I have my black girl sitting right there. But I want to say that the black boy is celebrated. Not to say that another child is not celebrated, the female child. But the black boy is revered in our culture. And after you have that birth, we go through this process of America. The history is what it is. Invasion, colonization, the European slave trade, where 1 in 4 perished in the journey over here. Remember, 1 in 40 million. Now, 1 in 4 perished on the journey in the transatlantic trade. During enslavement, out of that 1 in 4 that survived, 1 in 5 perished in the plantations of the South through brutal violence. Not just hard working conditions and disease, but by the violence of white oppressors. So then we endure 300 years of enslavement and 400 years of violent oppression, only to find ourselves in Jim Crow segregation and systematic racial segregation. Then we survived integration. Some of you think it was the blessing to be, but integration was a hard thing to survive when you come out of it with nothing. And how many of you have generational wealth that can hire defense attorneys to defend your children when they're imprisoned? Raise your hand. And then what happens? We have the stereotypes, the assaults on our masculinity as black men, the belief that we are inferior bred in us from the time we are young children until the time we are adults, because we can't even walk fast or slow without being looked at in the same way. And when President Barack Obama makes that admission to the world, you know it's a serious thing. Why? Because he's not the one most likely to make such an admission. Then we have to defy the educational statistics. The sociologists were the most studied people in America. They love to study us. Just ask Henrietta Lacks that question. And now we have a new world. Some of you call it a post-racial America. Some of you so liberal that you're blind, but it's cases like this that cause you to move into action. But those of us who are in the trenches fighting these battles know that while some things have changed, other things have gotten worse. With the striking down of the Voting Rights Act and affirmative action, we enter a new world where we might call it Robert's Crow. You with me? Robert's Crow. For the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. And then we find ourselves now with all of this in this 21st century, with all of this historical experience. We're told that racism doesn't exist, that race wasn't an issue in the killing of Trayvon Martin. Both the prosecution and the defense took the position, and if you've listened to the stupidity of the Florida State Attorney, you'll hear the same thing. A denial that racism exists. Are you angry and outraged? Yes. I don't know, sir, right here with the black shirt. Are you angry and outraged? What are you willing to do about it? You don't know? Oh, I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna tell you. Now, I can go into a spiritual critique about the spiritual essence of having children. I'm not gonna do that with you. What I can tell you is that there are qualities that God has given to man and woman: innovation, creativity, the emotions of love and hate and jealousy and fear and forgiveness. And we've seen a lot of forgiveness. The prosecution forgave itself. The defense forgave itself. The state of Florida forgave itself. And the Martins are struggling to forgive. Struggling. Strong people. Stronger than me. Much stronger than me. So what characteristic here then best defines the Zimmerman vision of America? America where our children have no youth, and I'm talking about black youth right now. Where they must live in fear, and we as parents have to live in fear of them. It's not the state, and it's not the stand your ground law. It is the human condition. It is racism in its endemic nature and the lack of understanding of what it actually means. Racism at its core is a belief in the biological superiority of one group over another, first and foremost. Calling someone a creepy cracker doesn't make you a racist if you have no context for it. But profiling someone solely based on how they look does communicate racism. You all know that. So the Zimmerman trial here opened up and closed with a cruel joke. The joke being that the life of a black man was worthless and the notion of black citizenship a farce. And its roots lay in what I'll call, and what others have called, the new racism or scientific racism. When you can look at another human being and place hundreds of years of baggage and stereotypes, when you can look at them as an inferior species, as Juror 37 so eloquently stated in her interview with Anderson Cooper, you're in the realm of a new racism. What is it about the black skin and the African that causes such violent reaction? There is no history in America of black violence against whites. There's none. There's none that we can point to outside of ordinary crime. Since when have we gone in and destroyed a community like Rosewood in 1923 or the Ocoee Massacre in 1920? Since when have we bombed white churches and lynched white folks. It's not in us to behave that way except in self-defense, and unfortunately, we've lost that spirit of self-defense. Stand your ground gives it back to you. I'm gonna get to that. And what relevance does law have in a highly regulated society where there's human relations? If we're to say that the law is fair, how can racial bias permeate the legal system? It's not just the criminal justice system. There's racial bias in the legal system, period. Whether it's buying a piece of property in real estate law or corporation law, it's there, it exists, and we confront it every day as lawyers. But most important, what does this case mean to you? I've argued that this is the most important case on race relations since Brown versus Board of Education. And let me remind you the era that we're living in. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney said in Scott v. Sanford, also known as the Dred Scott decision, namely, current or former slaves and their descendants had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. That the black had no rights that the white man was bound to respect. If that doesn't encapsulate the very mentality of the Zimmerman trial, I don't know what does. He went on to say that whether free or enslaved, blacks were not acknowledged as part of the people of this country, nor were they intended to be included in the general words used in that memorable instrument. They had for more than a century before been regarded as beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations. And so far inferior are these black people that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. This is your justice system. This is the logic and history of the system that you live in. This is your America. And the question is, does that mentality that governed America since its founding until the end of Jim Crow segregation still form a part of the logic of the system today? I've argued that there's a fault in the system, and we can get very linear lawyers to come talk about the system and law and the defense, and we like to debate, well, maybe it could, maybe it wouldn't. But they lack something, the ability to understand social construct. There's a fault in the system. It doesn't account for racial and cultural bias, meaning that racism is a part of the system, but the structure of it is not designed to account for the bias in it. Why? Because we were never supposed to be a part of the system itself. It didn't envision us in its creation. So the notion that inequality can be born into a legal system was not a part of the logic of the Founding Fathers or the Supreme Court itself and the system from that point on forward. Because if it did, wouldn't the victim have a right to be judged by a jury of his peers? Where were Trayvon Martin's peers in that jury? I live 20 minutes from Sanford, and I can tell you that as soon as the jury was picked, I knew the outcome of the case. Right then and there. The prosecution thought that women who are mothers would be compassionate toward a teenager being killed. But these are the same women who hold their purse when you get on the elevator. These are the same women who, when you go to a 5-star hotel, hand you their keys to the car when you're waiting for your car to be brought up. These are the same women when you go shopping who profile you and watch you. So how could they judge the very thing that they fear most, a young black teenager, to be a victim in this case? Now, that may not be nationwide, and it's not for every white woman, but we can't talk about this case without talking about the role of the white woman in the oppression of the African in America. You can't do it. They get a pass because they're a new minority now, but they were a part of the plantation system. They raped black men. They were a part of Jim Crow. And now they're the beneficiaries of the very system. So when we compete compete with them, we often are the ones that are the most disadvantaged because the fathers and the sons hiring are hiring their sisters and their brothers and their aunts and their cousins. This is real. It's real talk. So the real question is, why do they fear us so much if we've never committed violence against them? What has been so ingrained in the culture and the history of this country that creates such a fear? What makes them so insecure about their global standing among the races? Because this problem we're describing is not just a Florida problem, and it's not just an American problem. It's a global problem. It's an international problem, where one race has so dominated another, where even in the African continent, if you go to a hotel, the brothers there will serve the white person before they serve the black person if they're from the same country and make the same amount of money. In fact, the black person can make 100 times more. So where does this mentality come from? Why is there such an insecurity? But the Zimmerman acquittal is worse than anything we've seen before. It's worse than a 20th century lynching. It's worse than Emmett Till, because we're in the 21st century. We understand Emmett Till. It's very clear, the era that we're in, but we're supposed to be living in a society where Brother Bird doesn't get strapped to a chain and dragged behind a truck until his body decomposes and falls apart. President Obama said if Trayvon Martin was of age and was armed, could he have stood his ground on that sidewalk? Let me say it again. If Trayvon Martin was of age and was armed, could he have stood his ground on that sidewalk? And Obama asked, if the answer to that question is at least ambiguous, then it seems to me that we should examine those laws. Well, maybe he's right. But maybe if he was of age and armed, he should have found himself in imminent fear of death or grave bodily injury and shot first. Is that too revolutionary for you? Self-defense is self-defense. Even if the law has a logic of one people protecting themselves against another people, if it's here, you better use it if you know what the outcome is from this trial. You better think about it, because repealing the law and this new argument made from the Justice Department is not hitting the issue on the head at all. And in fact, we have to draw a distinction between statutory self-defense law, which gives the presumption of rightness to the shooter, and a pre-hearing to avoid prosecution before a prosecution actually exists, and stand your ground that's developed through jurisprudence and doctrine. Remember that the defense in this case didn't claim statutory self-defense, stand your ground. They argued self-defense, stand your ground using the jurisprudence, in part because that pre-hearing, that hearing about immunity under the statute, would have led to George Zimmerman being put on the stand and questioned. And they didn't want that, because something might come out that they didn't want to come out, which is why they didn't put him on the stand to begin with. I don't blame his lawyers. His lawyers are defense lawyers. Remember this, it's the prosecution that prosecutes the black men that you see flooding our criminal justice system. It's not the defense lawyers. The defense lawyers are typically the good guys and girls. In this case, we got it mixed up. We think, well, the prosecution was good because we wanted justice for Trayvon Martin, and the defense was bad. But I can tell you right now, even though I don't agree with anything the defense did, they have a greater experience and appreciation for the plight of black men in the criminal justice system than the prosecution does. Sorry you have to hear that, but it's the truth. And we can get into the nuance of how lawyers who are representing the Martin family maybe or maybe not made a mistake in one way or another that caused the case to be what it is. I'll leave that to you to research and look at. What I know is this. This was the worst possible outcome for a black teenager. An all-white female jury, an all-white defense, all-white prosecution. And remember, one of the jurors is either Latin or black. They never heard of a black Latin or what she might have been. But what we do know is the attitudinal data in terms of how Latin people and Hispanics and Latinos generally view blacks is negative. All of the attitudinal data shows that. In fact, it's on par with white Americans, particularly in the South. So when we talk about this question of black and Latino youth, my concern is why are Latinos killing blacks? Whether it's someone who plays for the New England Patriots or George Zimmerman or gangs in Los Angeles committing what I would call a removal crime against black populations in the city of Los Angeles through gang violence. We don't want to have that conversation because it's not politically correct for the progressive to have it. But what's clear is you're all here because we play this role as a people who have always been the moral compass of America. When it's been heartless, we brought light to it to try and reflect and show it what it can be. And we always live in this hope, knowing that it can turn on us at any time, as it has done here. Maybe we should get rid of all the guns. It will never happen. I would prefer to live in a society that operates like Canada or the United Kingdom with respect to gun laws, where people don't have them in abundance. But they find different ways of killing there, by the way, particularly the use of knives. The Second Amendment is fine with me. Stand your ground is okay with me. As a father and a black man who knows how to stand my ground, I'm okay with it. So where do we go from here? What option are you left with? Well, we can accommodate to the current condition. You can pursue a path of progressive reformism. Let's pass new laws. Let's legislate, litigate over the issue, but you can't legislate or litigate character or racial bias. It's not possible. Thank you very much.
Dr. Helen taught at Florida International University's African Diaspora Studies program and also for UMass Boston. Very
Well, I think this verdict is kind of a reminder for us of the system did work. Like it was said, the system worked exactly the way it was meant to work. There was no mistake. And we have to keep that in mind. We have to remember that. We should not forget that. I have to say that somehow I was hoping, something would happen, but I got the reminder too that that's the way the system works. And the way the televised criminalization on Trayvon Martin operated could be also a moment for us to really look at how that system operates. That with this non-guilty verdict, we cannot be in denial. We have to face what is happening. Interestingly, looking at media abroad, the verdict is framed as a US incident. Many have said, and I've read, only in the US this could happen. So really, that's the question. Is it really something that we would only see in the United States? It's true. It did happen in Sanford, Florida. There's that one location that we all have in mind. That's the court, where the court is. But abroad in mainstream media, the focus, tend to frame this event as, again, a US event. And somehow to move away from it, maybe because, well, it's just one more incident as racist America. So let's look a little bit, what is this system? This is white supremacy at its best, unleashed. That's how it operates. Let's look around us, and what do we see? Just a few examples of this white supremacy around us. This is the same system, that white supremacy that 2 years ago in March, as we had Western ship crisscrossing the Mediterranean, getting ready to attack Libya, we had a small boat with Africans from Eritrea, Sudan, Niger, Ethiopia, trying to reach Europe. And as they ran out of food, they ran out of water, they tried to get help. The ships were right there, everybody ignored them. Out of 72, 63 died in 10 days. Although they kept sending signals, they kept asking for help. It's the same system that tells us, who has a good skin, who has bad hair, who has good hair, how we should try to change that. It's the same system that says that, for some people it's okay to go on sex tourism and prey on men, women, boys and girls in Asia, in the Caribbean. It's that system because also we participate in that somehow that allows people to die in a garment factory in Bangladesh because we like to buy things that are not too expensive and people have to work for that. It's that same system that have soccer players, black soccer players being welcomed by monkey screams, bananas when they arrive in the stadium. It's the same system that allows Islamophobia throughout Europe, for instance, where women are attacked just because they're wearing a veil. They can't get their kids to school because the police are attacking them. It's that system where not long ago in Italy, just a few months ago, we have a new minister of Congolese origin, descent, who's welcome and compared as an orangutan. And, of course there's a debate, but that's part of what that system does. And it's that same system that forgot Haiti after an earthquake where the promise of good help and money coming on the way were somehow forgotten. It's that system in the island where I come from, in Martinique, that allows to spread toxic pesticide that is forbidden in Europe, that is forbidden in the United States, but somehow France decided it's okay to have it spread on the banana plantation over there. So we're familiar with that system, but we tend to forget that all these, the few examples that I gave, they are connected. And if ever you travel to Europe, don't get confused if ever you were welcome, and because you of course may pass as an American, especially if you have dollars to spend. But if you stay a little longer, and if you run out of dollar, well, you may then become just another black person, and you will have a different experience. So I don't know if it's a new racism. I'm not really sure. There's a very long history behind that white supremacy. It took a long time to build, many centuries. It was in Spain in the 16th century that it was discussed whether or not black people were fully human, whether or not they could maybe do the job in the Americas. It was in the 16th century also that the Dutch arrived in Southern Africa, which they saw as an empty land. They couldn't see anybody there. And when they saw someone, they decided that this person had to be killed because they had a religious mission to do so and to rebuild a new world according to their rule. The roots in colonization and slavery. When we reach the 20th century, the Holocaust, a long training, again, take a man like Hermann Göring, who was the right wing of Hitler. His father was leading the extermination of the Herero people in Southern Africa, organizing concentration camp there. So what we see in Europe, we know already where it's been experimented. So this system really doesn't have boundaries, and we have to keep that in mind. we have to keep in mind that what we're going to do here, and there are many things to do. Maybe we would like to act right away, maybe it will take more time, but we need to build this movement. But what we will do will have an impact on the rest of the world, in the sense that it can still be framed as just a US incident, something that people will talk about in the neighborhoods where we have black people in Paris, London, but it could just be a conversation, unless we act upon it so that we make these connections. So keeping all that in mind, right now, we know that George Zimmerman is our target, and we want to continue, move on in the sense that we want to be able to build these connections. Thank you.
Final speaker this evening is Trayvon McLaurin, who's a criminal defense attorney from Miami, and he's going to talk about some of these processes from this particular area of expertise.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Franz McLaurin. Everyone who knows me calls me Jara. I am a criminal defense trial attorney. I'm a former public defender, trial attorney. That's what I do. I go to trials. When attorneys need help in trials, I'm the guy they call. When you need help in trial and you want to increase your success rate, I'm the guy you call. I go to trial. That's what I do, all day, every day. So my perspective is slightly different from some of the other members on this panel. President Obama, in his speech, he mentioned about the black experience in America, and it really did touch a chord with me. I think I've been waiting 5 years to see the Leo in President Obama come out, and finally, I began to see a little bit of that in his speech. Because I don't know any black man who hasn't had those experiences that he talked about. I know that for myself, as a graduate of FAMU, were it not for the experience that I had with being profiled on the Florida Turnpike, because I was driving a nice car, because I had dreadlocks, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning, were it not for that experience, I would have never gotten into law. I was an accountant. I'm from the Caribbean, so my father's vision was get a degree that you could take anywhere in the world. So that's what I was doing. I was going to become an accountant, and I was going to leave America. And I got stopped on the Florida Turnpike, I was profiled, and the whole experience was so humiliating, so embarrassing, and there was no one to look to get help from, that I decided I wanted to go to law so that could never happen to anyone else again, and that's what I did. With this particular case here, the Trayvon Martin case, unquestionably, it's a tragedy. And a lot of people feel pain, a lot of people feel hurt about what happened to Trayvon Martin, and a lot of people feel sympathy for his family. I'm going to talk to you about the trial and the process and the criminal justice process. There are two different systems at play, and I implore you to not get the two different systems confused. There is a criminal justice system, and there is a trial system. The criminal justice system failed miserably. The trial system was perfect. I don't have an issue with the verdict because of the way the prosecution brought the case. As my professors at FAMU would say, garbage in, garbage out. If you watch CNN, Mark Garagos was on there with Jeffrey Toobin and Sonny Hostin. Jeffrey Toobin and Sonny Hostin are former prosecutors. I'm not sure what Mark Garagos' background is, but when he said the prosecution blew the case, the two former prosecutors took offense to that. They were offended. But I think the prosecution blew the case. But they blew the case from before most people even understand how they blew the case. First of all, they charged George Zimmerman with second-degree murder. Second-degree murder means they have to prove that there was an unlawful killing. And I want to read the actual words from the statute, which I have. The unlawful killing of a human being when perpetrated by any act imminently dangerous to another and evincing a depraved mind regardless of human life. The way they tried to prove that part, there's many different elements to that. First of all is unlawful killing. One of the other elements was this element about the depraved heart. The way they tried to prove a depraved heart was through ill will, spite, hatred, or evil intent. Now, this isn't, my analysis isn't Johnny-come-lately. I have been giving seminars to churches for 6 years, and when the Trayvon Martin case first came out, I was giving seminars to churches in Broward, and I told them, there's no way the prosecution can prove a second-degree murder case with what they have. I think their resources are better spent with manslaughter, because if they went forward with a manslaughter case, the only thing they have to prove is that George Zimmerman caused the death of another by culpable negligence. If he was convicted of manslaughter, he would do 30 years in prison. This judge would have given him the max. There's no question in my mind that he would have gotten the max. I would much rather see him do 30 years in prison than walk away scot-free. Now, a lot of people take issue with what I say because they look at it from the black perspective. But they're not really seeing it from the black perspective because they don't understand the black perspective. The George Zimmermans of the world and the Casey Anthonys of the world, these are not the people you see in a criminal courtroom as defendants. They're not. The people you see look exactly like me and exactly like you 70% of the times. 70% of the times. So when people are up in arms about certain defenses being brought forth, well, these are the defenses that people like you have to use 7 out of every 10 times. So it affects you much more than it affects the George Zimmermans and the Casey Anthonys of the world. You're the person that it affects. Now, what we have to understand is in this particular case, and we have to go back to the beginning, Trayvon Martin was killed. George Zimmerman was apprehended by the police and he was questioned. He was not booked. For all intents and purposes, he was arrested because his freedom of movement was stopped, but he wasn't formally arrested. He wasn't charged. The lead investigator wanted to charge him with manslaughter. They brought it to the county prosecutor, and this is where black people have to pay attention. The county prosecutor is a man named Norm Wolfinger. He's the county prosecutor for Seminole County. Norm Wolfinger decided that he was going to bring the case to a grand jury. Does anyone here know what a grand jury is or how it operates? No. You said you do? Well, let me describe it to you. If I take the first 6 people here, and I take you guys in the room, and it's just you, 6, myself, a court reporter, and a judge. There's no one else there. Nothing from that grand jury can be released to anyone. You're under strict confidentiality rules, and you will be prosecuted if you release anything from the grand jury. The only people who know what's said in that room are the people in the room. The joke in the law is that you can indict a ham sandwich in a grand jury. So if you were alive, let's say in, when was President Kennedy killed? 68? 68, 69? 63? They could bring you and say you're the one that killed John F. Kennedy, even if you weren't there. And they could probably indict you. The grand jury is ultra secretive. My thought is that Norm Wolfinger wanted to bring it to the grand jury and let the Trayvon Martin case die a quiet death by the grand jury. Then he can walk out, he can say, listen, I did my part. They decided not to indict. Or if they indicted and they brought a weak case, then he could say, well, you know what? We tried to tell the grand jury that we didn't have a strong case, but they indicted. That's what he wanted to do. The governor, Rick Scott, appointed Angela Corey. She came in, she said, no, that's bunk. we don't have to go to a grand jury. I'm going to indict him straight away. And that's what she did. The problem was she indicted him for a charge that she couldn't prove, in my opinion. Now, the indictment process is something else I want you to look at too. When a police officer does something against a regular civilian, that's the same process that most prosecutors go through. It's happening right now in West Palm Beach. A police officer kills a black youth. The prosecutor can just indict that officer, but they don't do it. They go through a grand jury. Why? For what? They're no special. They're not more special than I am. I don't go through a grand jury. When you want to indict me, you indict me. Why do you have to go behind closed doors where I don't know what you're saying to the grand jury? Indict him and prosecute him like you would anyone else, but they don't do it. Now, if the prosecution thought that their case was going to be stronger on emotions than on evidence, then they have to know who are they dealing with, who are they appealing to. And Mr. Levin talked about a 6-member white jury panel. If you knew as a prosecution that you were going to lean heavily on emotion, that was going to be your case, and your case wasn't so strong on evidence for second-degree murder now. I'm not talking about manslaughter because I think they had a manslaughter case. But for second-degree murder, you knew that your case was weak on evidence for second-degree murder, but it was strong on emotion. Wouldn't you want a jury that was going to side with the emotional impact of the case? And if you wanted a jury that was going to side with the emotional impact of the case, wouldn't you try to move the case to a venue where you could get a more diverse jury pool? That was one of the many errors the prosecution made. I'm not one of those people that criticize the prosecutors in terms of their presentations. I thought they did a very good job in terms of their presentation, in terms of their forcefulness. I really like the guy, I think his last name is Guy.
Yeah.
And I like Dilarianda. I thought they did a decent job in presenting their case, in terms of their presentation, not in terms of their strategy. One of the critical things that happened in that case that went by most people's radar was that the prosecution asked for a specific jury instruction to be included. The specific jury instruction was what's called the initial aggressor instruction. The initial aggressor instruction would have said that if a person was the initial aggressor, then they can't benefit from their self-defense. The judge denied it. That was a critical part. Because even though I thought that the prosecution had, well, as Mark Garrett said, blown the case, there's no telling if that instruction had been included, what the difference would have been. And I think it might have made a difference. Again, not for second-degree murder, but possibly for manslaughter. Now, what do we do? First of all, we have to understand who is the county prosecutor. What is the county prosecutor? How many people here live in Broward County? Just by a show of hands. Okay, brother in the red and white shirt, who is the county prosecutor in Broward County? You have no idea, right? Who else lives in Broward? Who's the Broward County prosecutor? He's been the same prosecutor since 1976.
You vote for him all the time.
The same prosecutor since 1976. They say that in Broward County, a black person is 3.7 times more likely to be charged for marijuana possession than a black person. Broward County has twice the amount of wrongful convictions than any of the other 66 counties in the state of Florida. Twice. The county prosecutor is the most powerful, in my opinion, hands down, the most powerful person in the county on any level. These are the people who make decisions as to who to prosecute, who to investigate. They are the Pied Piper of the police department. They play the tune that the police departments and the police officers march and dance to. They are the top law enforcement officer in every single county. Let me tell you how they change policy. In the state of Florida, we have what's called a driving on a suspended license charge, right? It's a misdemeanor offense. A lot of people think it's a traffic offense. No, it's a misdemeanor offense. If you're stopped in Dade County and you're driving on a suspended license because you failed to pay a fee, the police officer will give you what's called a notice of appearance. And they will tell you, if you get your license renewed before you go to court, the judge will dismiss it. And guess what? You do that, the judge dismisses it in Dade County. In Broward County, this is the same law now. It's the exact same law, same elements. In Broward County, you're driving on a suspended license, failure to pay a ticket, police officer pulls you over, guess what happens? You get arrested, you go to jail, you get booked, you have to pay a bond, you come out, you go to court with a renewed driver's license. Do you think the judge dismisses it? No. You go on probation. Why is there a difference? It's the same law. The difference is that in Dade County, the county prosecutor decided, I'm not wasting my resources on these cases. In Broward County, they don't care because the man has never been challenged. He's been there for 1976. Black people don't even know who he is. They don't even understand how he affects their lives. This is a huge problem in the criminal justice system. The county prosecutors exercise a tremendous amount of discretion. In Dade County, police officers are prosecuted left is right, up is down. In Broward County, not so much. Up until last year or 2 years ago when Mike Satz had to run for re-election, we prosecuted exactly one police officer in Broward County since 1976 for excessive use of force. One. It's absolutely ridiculous. So you want to know what to do? First of all, find out who your local candidates are for local positions. Your county commission board, your board of education, your school board, and your county prosecutor's office. How many of you have ever contributed money to a judicial candidacy? It's another huge problem. We have 110 judges in Dade County. How many of them are black? 9. 9. In Broward County, we have 90 judges, and we have 6 of them that are black. Black people don't contribute money, and they don't vote, except for the president. And then they complain. It's not gonna happen that way. If you wanna have change, you have to be the change that you wanna see happen. You have to get involved. You have to know who the county prosecutors are. You can't keep voting these people in, and you can't vote by, like by not going to vote, you're giving them your vote. We have to know, a great example, and I'll wrap this up, I know I'm going long. There's another case that's been in the news, the Marissa Alexander case. The judge in that case is James Daniel. He's up for election in 2014. I know there's someone here who knows someone in Duval County that they can call and find out, hey, is someone challenging this judge so I can support them? That's how we do it. Lastly, we have to be on juries. This whole thing that you see on television about the joke about jury service, it does not apply to you. The joke is on you if you think that you're not going to serve on a jury. It's ridiculous. I went to trial with a black man. I picked a 5-woman jury, same way like the George Zimmerman team did. It was a domestic violence case. And I picked a 5-woman jury. One of the male black jurors said during jury selection that he was mad because I didn't walk in with my client. And he was upset at me. Absolutely ridiculous. Black people come in there and they try to find any reason not to get on a jury. But who has more experience, real world experience than you do? Serve on a jury, get active in local politics. It's just that simple. Contribute money, even if it's $50 to a judicial campaign, a judicial candidate, or a candidate for county prosecutor. The county prosecutor is the most important position. I don't care what anyone says. The most important position in every single county. Thank you.
I'm going to do a follow-up because I took a small amount of time because I was the first person and I wanted to see how the process was going to work. But the point of the matter is this. I don't necessarily mind the fact that Angela Corey charged second degree because the jury still had manslaughter that they could consider, okay? And so it kind of gave them a way to go. In Dade County, the prosecutor here would not have done that. That is not her style. Kathleen Fernandez-Rundle charged what she believes she can prove. And actually, this case really should have come to Dade County because we have the most experience with stand your ground or self-defense. But the Governor Scott would not have given it to Kathleen Fernandez-Rundle because she's a Democrat, when in fact this office, and also the Public Defender's Office, is two of the best in the country. It really should have come here. They didn't necessarily have to move the case because the defendant has a right as well to be tried in his area where he has a jury of his peer. What they could have done as well, an option would be like they did in Casey and Anthony, is get jurors from another jurisdiction. Bring them in to get more diversity, because Stanford only has 13% black. So you want to get a more diverse jury pool, you could have brought the jury into Stanford, because we know exactly essentially what happened. Now, when you look at, I did not have that much of a problem with the prosecutor. I'm a former prosecutor. I have tried cases from traffic ticket to, unfortunately, double homicide. I've tried cases in federal courts and all over. But my problem was that, for one thing, another thing I think the judge did that kind of hurt the prosecutor's case, because I think this case was over at jury selection, is that there were two women that the prosecution wanted to strike, and the judge reseated those people. Because the defendants made an objection saying that the defense, that the state was getting rid of white women. The judge found that there was a pattern here, and the judge reseated those two white women. So that is also one of the problems, essentially, with the case. But I think it was lost at the jury selection point, and you can lose your case at that. I think they did not humanize the victim, because prosecuting 101 says you got to put your victim front and center. And you gotta be the voice, the face, the emotion of Trayvon Martin. And somehow or other, I don't feel that they did a good job with humanizing the victim and reminding the jury why we were here. I don't think that Rachel was prepared sufficiently because credibility of the witness comes not only from the disconnect the jurors had, but also your demeanor in court. And I know she was upset, I know that she was young, but I think that if somebody had prepared her well enough, she would have done as fabulously as she's now doing. Because we see before the verdict, and now we see after the verdict. And it's too late that she's now prepared to give these fabulous television interviews when we needed this Rachel Jantel that we're seeing. This is a person who needed to show up. And the defense used jury, the people who helped you pick jury, consultants? And I believe the state did not. Whoever dressed Rachel should have realized that in a high-profile case like this, everything matters. And the big earring and all like that, she shouldn't have had that. Very, very simple makeup, no big earring and all like that, because you're here to tell a story, which she never changed. And that's the sad thing about it, because she never changed her story. She was very consistent. But apart from the prejudice that the jurors obviously brought into the room, the way she was dressed, not how she looked, but just the way she was with big earrings, huge makeup, big dark eyes, makeup, long lash. You know, we have to dress our clients. We dress our clients all the time. And that, you know, if you look at Casey Anthony, she looked like a little girl, her hair pulled back. That's all part of what you do. It's nothing different. We do that all the time, all the time. The other thing that I felt was an issue is the lead, it's rare, I've never seen it before, where the lead detective turned on the prosecution. And they should have seen it coming. When he gave his deposition, he was in sync with what was required of him. And you get the sense that he was saying, you just wait until I get to court. And in court, when your lead detective says that I believe the defendant, I would suggest you have a problem. But the prosecution should have seen it coming, because this gentleman, to me, was so evil that because they took the case away from him, he had committed himself that he was going to let someone who killed an unarmed youth in cold blood go free, because that was revenge for him. But the prosecution should have seen it coming and do something different. Could they have done the case without him? Perhaps. In Dade County, I still act as if I'm at the state attorney's office. But the state attorney's office has done cases without your lead, because sometimes our lead get arrested before the case comes to trial. So we're used to doing cases without your lead detective. Could they have put the case on without the lead? And obviously the defense would bring him, and then maybe they could turn on their witness. Or it is that they knew that he was going to say that, and they wanted to be the ones to bring it forth because it gives you a little bit more credibility. But I do believe, regardless of all the things we have talked about, they had manslaughter on the table, however it got there, and they could have fallen for manslaughter. The only other thing I could imagine is that the jury instruction was so convoluted, and for jurors who wanted a way out, they got it from the jury instruction, especially when the judge did not allow the instruction as to the first aggression, because that, in my mind, would have perhaps made all the difference. Where do we go from here? Marissa Alexander, I interviewed her attorney about 2 years ago. It is on my Blog Talk Radio. This is a woman in Jacksonville who was battered. And this is a woman who had a restraining order against her ex-husband. The ex-husband turned up at her house, and she was cornered in her garage, and she fired warning shots. It never hit him. He was not in danger of being killed. She was arrested, and she raised stand your ground, self-defense. The judge said not so, and now she's serving 20 years in prison and for firing warning shots. That is still a case that we can't influence. So I would ask you not to forget Marissa. There's a young gentleman who was killed at a gas station and for playing loud music. That case is still available. And the gentleman who killed him, the white gentleman who killed him, is claiming self-defense. After he killed the unarmed young boy, no gun was found. What did he do? He didn't call 911. He went to his hotel room and he ate pizza. That case is still coming up. Let us not let that one fall through the cracks. And let us send a message loud and clear that we will no longer stand our ground and allow for people who kill unarmed, primarily black men, to get away with it because of the law. And the bad law have bad results, and this is a bad law.
But who cries for us?